When a black woman in first class is denied champagne while others are served, she takes a bold step that exposes the airline's unfair treatment. What happens next leaves the staff scrambling to save their jobs and sparks a powerful conversation about respect and equality. Bianca, a confident woman in her early 30s with a sharp sense of style and a quiet grace, adjusted her scarf as she eased into her first-class seat. She had worked tirelessly for years to afford moments like these, flying in luxury, where comfort and respect were expected, not questioned. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, their polished smiles bright against the dim cabin lighting. Bianca leaned back, glancing at the small window beside her, the view outside dark and endless as the plane prepared for takeoff. A moment of peace settled over her. After a long week of meetings and deadlines, this trip was her chance to exhale. As the seatbelt sign dinged off and the plane leveled at cruising altitude, Bianca watched as the first-class attendants began their service. Crisp, white napkins, gleaming glasses, and trays of champagne moved gracefully through the cabin. A sense of calm and exclusivity hung in the air. Bianca turned to the window again, lost in thought, until the sound of footsteps beside her caught her attention. "Champagne, ma'am?" the flight attendant asked the man seated across the aisle. He nodded, a glass of bubbly placed on the tray in front of him. Bianca smiled to herself, waiting for her turn. But as the attendant reached her row, Bianca noticed something odd. The smile faltered, the gaze avoided hers, and the tray of glasses remained firmly out of reach. When the flight attendant finally addressed her, the words were clipped. "Would you like some water or juice?" Bianca blinked, her smile fading. She gestured toward the tray of champagne. "Actually, I'll have a glass of champagne, please." The attendant's polite mask slipped for just a moment, replaced by something colder. "I'm sorry, but we're out." Bianca frowned slightly, glancing around. Another passenger 2 rows ahead had just been handed a glass, the bubbles catching the light. "It seems like there's still some left," she said, keeping her voice calm. The attendant straightened, her tone sharper now. "I'm afraid it's reserved for other guests." Bianca felt a heat rise in her chest. She glanced at her ticket, double-checking the first class printed in bold letters. She wasn't imagining this. Every other passenger in the section had been offered champagne, yet somehow she was being excluded. Instead of causing a scene, Bianca leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. She wasn't just upset. She was confused, even hurt. Was it her? Or was it something more? The questions hung heavy as she watched the flight attendant move through the cabin, her service seamless for everyone else. Bianca reached for her phone, discreetly pulling it out from her bag. She needed to document this. She opened her notes app and began writing down everything she had witnessed. Then she glanced at the airline's in-flight contact number. A quiet resolve began to settle in her chest. She wasn't going to let this slide. For now, she stayed quiet, watching, waiting. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The flight attendant continued her rounds, pouring glasses of champagne for other passengers without hesitation. Bianca watched as each person smiled, thanked the attendant, and sipped their drink. It was as if she was invisible, an unspoken exclusion that gnawed at her. Bianca remained calm on the surface, but inside, her resolve hardened. She wasn't the type to make assumptions without evidence. She needed to be sure. Quietly, she leaned over to the older woman seated next to her, who had just received her own glass of champagne. "Excuse me," Bianca said politely. "Did the attendant say anything about running out of champagne when she served you?" The woman, her demeanor warm, looked puzzled. "No, not at all. She offered it like usual. Why do you ask?" Bianca smiled tightly, nodding. "Just wondering." She sat back in her seat, feeling the sting of the answer she already suspected. It wasn't about the champagne. It was about her. Whether it was her appearance, her skin color, or something else entirely, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been singled out. Bianca opened the airline's app on her phone and navigated to the customer service chat. She composed a clear, concise message, detailing the interaction without emotion but with enough precision to demand attention. She hit send and waited, her fingers gripping the armrests. Moments later, a reply came through. "We're sorry to hear about your experience, Ms. Harper. Please hold while we escalate your concern to the in-flight supervisor." Bianca glanced at the attendant, who was now chatting and laughing with another passenger. Her phone buzzed again. The word manager caught Bianca's attention. She wasn't looking for revenge, just accountability. If this had happened to her, who else had it happened to before? How many others had quietly endured the same treatment, choosing to brush it off rather than confront it? As if on cue, the onboard supervisor appeared, a neatly dressed man with a professional demeanor. He walked down the aisle, scanning the passengers until his eyes landed on Bianca. He approached her seat, his voice low and respectful. "Ms. Harper, I understand there's been a concern regarding your experience with our service today. May I speak with you privately?" Bianca nodded and followed him to a quieter area near the galley. The supervisor listened intently as Bianca recounted the incident. She spoke calmly but firmly, outlining the exact sequence of events and how she had been treated differently from other passengers. When she finished, the supervisor's face was serious. "Ms. Harper, I deeply apologize for what you've experienced. This is not the level of service we strive to provide, and I assure you we will address this immediately." He returned her to her seat and disappeared into the galley. Minutes later, the flight attendant reappeared, her face pale. She approached Bianca hesitantly, holding a glass of champagne. "Miss Harper," the attendant began, her tone forced and apologetic, "I'd like to offer this to you and apologize for any misunderstanding earlier." Bianca looked at the glass, then at the attendant. Her voice was steady as she responded, "No, thank you. It's not about the champagne. It's about respect." The attendant faltered, unsure of what to say, before retreating back down the aisle. Bianca returned to her seat, her head held high. This wasn't the end of it. She knew the airline would have to answer for their actions, publicly. Bianca opened her phone, typed out a concise summary of the experience, and posted it to her social media. She ended the post with a question. How many others have faced this kind of treatment and stayed silent? The response was immediate. Within minutes, comments poured in from people sharing their own experiences, offering support, and demanding action from the airline. The post gained traction, and Bianca knew the issue had outgrown this single flight, but the wheels of accountability had already begun turning, and Bianca was ready to see where they would lead. By the time the plane landed, Bianca's social media post had gained hundreds of comments, likes, and shares. Strangers from across the world offered support, many recounting similar experiences of being treated unfairly in situations where they should have felt respected. The airline's name was trending online, and the weight of public attention was growing by the minute. Bianca disembarked, her confidence unshaken. As she stepped into the terminal, her phone buzzed. The notification read, "We are escalating this issue to our management team. Someone will contact you shortly." Before she could respond, the airline's customer relations manager called her directly. Their tone was urgent but polite. "Ms. Harper, we've been made aware of your post and your experience during the flight. First, we want to deeply apologize. This is unacceptable, and we're taking immediate steps to investigate." Bianca listened, her expression neutral. The manager continued, explaining that they would begin an internal review and that the flight attendant involved had been placed on temporary suspension pending further action. "We understand that an apology isn't enough," the manager added. "We'd like to meet with you to discuss how we can make this right, not just for you, but to ensure this never happens again." Bianca agreed to a meeting, knowing it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about changing a culture of quiet discrimination that people too often endured in silence. The next morning, the story was everywhere. News outlets picked up Bianca's post, amplifying her experience. Discussions about respect, equality, and accountability lit up comment sections and talk shows. At the meeting with the airline executives, Bianca spoke clearly and firmly. "I'm not here for a free ticket or compensation. I'm here because this can't keep happening. Your staff needs better training. Your policies need to reflect inclusivity. And your passengers need to know they'll be treated with dignity, no matter who they are." The executives nodded, promising swift action. They laid out a plan: mandatory sensitivity training for all staff, a new system for passengers to report discrimination in real time, and a formal statement apologizing to Bianca and the broader community. One evening, as she scrolled through her messages, she came across a note from a young woman. "Thank you for speaking up," it read. "Your story gave me the courage to stand up for myself today." Bianca smiled, her heart full. What had started as an insult on a flight had turned into a movement, one rooted in respect and empowerment. She knew there was still work to do, but she also knew this: silence was never the answer. Discrimination thrives in silence, but change begins with courage. Standing up for respect isn't just about one person, it's about creating a world where everyone is valued equally,